with cancer. Has a lot to do with it, because it turns out that cancer cells have a protein coating around them which has a negative electrostatic charge. We're touching on the electrical side of this equation here for a moment. But these cells have an electrical charge around them carried by this protein coating, and it's negative. The immune system also is negative. All of those immune factors, you know, the monocytes, leukocytes, lymphocytes, all those other sites running around there, they're all negative. And we need them to fight against things that are alien to the body. And one of the mysteries has always been, why is it that the immune system does not attack and destroy cancer cells? Isn't that foreign to the body? Well, no, it's not foreign to the body, actually. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's part of the healing process. So it's not foreign at all. But secondly, the cancer cells, when they get out of control, when they're no longer just healing cells, but they become what we call cancer cells, they develop this protein coating and they take on a negative electrostatic charge. Now, we know that like charges repel each other. So negative charges repel each other. Therefore, the cancer cell with its negative charge repels the white blood cells with their negative charge, and so it's well protected from the immune system. How do you get rid of that protein coating? You digest it with proteolytic enzymes. The body is supposed to produce enough leftover proteolytic enzymes to take care of this, if necessary. Now, most of those enzymes are used in the digestion, in your intestinal tract, the digestion of protein, particularly animal protein. Red meat takes a lot of it. And isn't it interesting that we find that heavy meat eaters have a much higher incidence of cancer than those who do not eat a lot of meat? Isn't it interesting that diabetics who have a weak pancreas have a much higher incidence of cancer than non-diabetics? Isn't it interesting that those who come from a hereditary strain where the pancreas is weak, it's passed down from generation to generation, have a much higher rate of cancer than those than other people? And we say, well, that's the hereditary factor of cancer. In a way, it is. But it's all traceable to the pancreas and the production of the proteolytic enzymes. And so one of the first things that a doctor will do who is following this theory is to take his patient off of meat and all dairy products. And that's why this vegetarian or vegan diet comes into play. It's not just a fad. There's a reason behind it. Now, some patients say that I can't do that. No way, I'm going to give up my meat and my cheese. And they don't do too well under therapy. But if a person is fighting for their life, they'll say, hey, that's an easy thing to give up. And you'd be surprised at the results. My wife will tell you about those results if you want to ask her about them, because they're amazingly good. But you have to give up the meat. So that is the intrinsic factor. What about the extrinsic factor? Well, now we're talking about Laetrile. That's something that comes from outside. It comes from food. And so we call it the food factor. What is this food factor? When it's found in nature, it's called amygdalin. That's the chemical name of it. It's been known for a long time, from the turn of the century. You can look it up in some old chemistry books. Amygdalin is well defined and well known. But it wasn't used in the treatment of cancer until fairly recently. Amygdalin, in its purified and concentrated form, which is used in the treatment of clinical cancer, is called Laetrile. It's basically the same substance. Well, what is it? It's a molecule. It has 4 components. 2 of them are glucose, or sugar. One of them, for those of you who are taking notes, is cyanide. Don't forget to put that down. Cyanide will scare the devil out of you. And the other one is benzaldehyde. Now that scares people. Cyanide. You mean you're recommending that I take cyanide? It'll kill me, won't it? Well, we have a very funny view of cyanide. Yeah, cyanide is deadly poisonous in its gaseous or nascent form, and they do kill people with it. They execute them with cyanide. And if you get some of it accidentally, you're in bad shape. But that's only in the free form, or the pure form of cyanide. Now, when cyanide is locked up in molecular form with other elements, then it's not cyanide anymore. It's cyano something else. And it's not necessarily toxic in that form. For example, vitamin B12 has cyanide in it. Did you know that? It's called cyanocobalamin. It's loaded with cyanide, but we would be dead without it. So in a way, you could say that cyanide is an essential nutrient for life in the proper form, but not in the gaseous form. So we're talking about cyanide in a molecule that is not gaseous at all, but it's locked up with benzaldehyde and it's locked up with glucose. And it's not cyanide, it's amygdalin. Now, the question really is, how does it work, or theoretically at least, how do we think it works in the treatment of cancer? And it's very simple. If you could release the cyanide at the cancer cell, wouldn't that be nifty? And not release it anywhere else? You've got this molecule, and if you're eating foods rich in this substance, amygdalin, it's in your food, and it's going through your bloodstream, and it's covering your whole body, and if it comes to a cancer cell, wouldn't it be great if you had some mechanism whereby you could give it a message and say, okay, dump your cyanide there. And that is exactly what happens. The only thing that will release that or unlock that molecule of amygdalin and release the cyanide and the benzaldehyde, which, by the way, is also toxic, the only thing that will release that is an enzyme, and it's called beta-glucosidase. In my book, I call it the unlocking enzyme. It's easier to remember, because that's what it does. It's an unlocking enzyme. So that enzyme will release the cyanide and the benzaldehyde. Isn't it interesting that that enzyme is found in cancer cells, and only in cancer cells? Amazing. It's an amazing mechanism of nature that could not have been accidental. It was designed to be that way. It's part of the body's natural mechanism to control this healing process. It works fine as long as you're eating foods that are rich in this substance. The problem is that modern man has gotten rid of just about every food that contains it. Why? Because it has a bitter taste to it. If you've ever chewed an apple seed, which your grandmother may have told you, don't eat those things. If you've ever chewed an apple seed or an apricot seed, they're bitter. But what you are tasting is the effect of the benzaldehyde and the cyanide being released. That is where this comes from. So people say, that's bitter, I don't want that. And so they select against foods like that in favor of sweeter foods and processed foods. And the more advanced civilization gets, and the more they refine their foods and have these delicate tasting foods and getting rid of all of these bitter foods, the higher the cancer rate goes. It's as simple as that. It used to be in this country, I guess it's about 80 years ago now, that there was no such thing as a sweet almond. I mean, we think almonds today are always nice. They taste good. They're sweet. There's no amygdalin in a sweet almond. But the original almonds, what we now call the bitter almonds, which 80 years ago that's all there was bitter almonds. They were all bitter. That's a rich source of vitamin B17 or laetrile or amygdalin, depending on what you want to call it. We've selected against these foods. You go to Northern California where they grow all these almond trees, and if you look about this far off the ground, you can see where the bark changes. They've all been grafted. The root is old bitter almond root tree, but from that point forward, they've grafted on twigs from the sweet almonds, and so we've gotten rid of that source. Lima beans used to have a little bit of amygdalin in them, and of course, even lima beans today aren't particularly good